Auzubillahiminash-shaytanir-rajim. Bismillahir-rahmanir-rahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear students. Welcome to session on language variation under the course English 4103 Sociolinguistics. In this session, I will talk about different aspects of language variation, and we will have a look at the major varieties of language. In real situations, when we human beings use language, we use language for communication. And sometimes we have to use different languages, sometimes we have to use different variation of the same language or varieties of the same language. We know that language varies from one individual to another, one speech community to another speech community, one class of a speech community to another of the same speech community. Again, language can vary on the basis of age, gender, social classes, occupation, or cultural groups in the same community or speech community. Language variation has at least two dimensions, geographical and social. And when we talk about the variability in a social dimension, we call them sociolectical dimension. Language is nothing but a code according to sociolinguistics. Whenever we are talking about language variation, we consider that this variation exists within the code of language. Factors for language variation. Language can vary for a number of reasons. The first and foremost is the participants. Participants as a factor of language variation has a number of aspects. For example, the relationship between or among the participants, the socio-economic, gender, or occupational aspects of the participants, or characteristics of the participants. Number of participants is also another major factor for the variation of language. The language used in a conversation where only two persons involved may vary or may have different characteristics when the same language is used in a conversation when more than two participants are involved. Another factor for language variation is how we use the language, that is, medium and mode of channels. Language can be used face-to-face, or language can be used for addressing a large audience by only one speaker, where there is no opportunity to contact each other. Participants play different roles in a conversation or in a language situation, and that is also another cause of language variation. If you are taking up the role of a teacher, and if you are taking up the role of a student, you can have different variation, or you can use different words or linguistic elements in two situations. For example, if you are a teacher, you are very formal with your students, but say one of your students is your sister or brother. When you speak in the classroom with her or him, that is your sister or brother, you have a very formal role or relation. But when you speak with the same person at home or out of class situation, you become very informal. Function of a speech event is another aspect or another cause for language variation. That is, the speech you are using, the language you are using, the sentences you are using, of course, you are using it for a number of functions or a particular function. And based on the function of your sentence or speech event, you can have different language or variation in the language. Type of discourse or genre is another factor for language variation. We'll talk about discourse, and we know that one word or one linguistic element can have different meanings in different genres, in different situations, in different subjects. Physical setting is another aspect or another important factor for language variation. Regional or geographical setting also affects language variation. In which area you are living and what are the participants from which geographical area you are speaking to or you are being involved with in conversation with. We have already said that language is nothing but a code. And what is a code? We know that a code is an arbitrary, pre-arranged set of signals. So code refers to signals or symbols, but which are pre-arranged. But the meaning of the codes or signals are arbitrary. A language is nothing but one variety of code. There are different types of codes. Say, the cows and the animals, they also use some code, but their code or codes have different meaning than the codes we human beings use. The total organization of different linguistic components in a language is called a code. Code is also an abstract system which is accepted arbitrarily in the community using it. That is why the same word can have a different meaning in one community and another meaning in another community. Now let us talk about the major varieties of language. The first one is dialect and sociolect. Dialect is a regional, temporal, that is time related, or social variety within a single language. So one single language can have a number of dialects in regards to region, time, or social characteristics. Dialect differs in pronunciation, grammar, and vocabulary from standard language. Standard language is one of the dialects which is socially favored and which is announced as the received standard language, and standard language can have a number of dialects. A dialect is a separate entity. So a dialect is a separate one, a unique one, but it is not a separate language because it is one dimension or variety of a language. Sometimes it is difficult to differentiate, that is, sometimes you may not be able to differentiate a dialect because of political boundaries only. For example, Dutch and some Low German dialects. In Bangladesh, we have also a number of dialects of Bangla language. For example, in Chittagong, in Borishal, in Noakhali, in the northern part of Bangladesh, we have dialects of Bangla. And each of these dialects has its own characteristics and which is somewhat different from the standard Bangla, but all of them are considered Bangla. So they are not different languages, but they are different dimensions of Bangla language. So regional dialect refers to a dialect in regards to local or geographical or territorial dialects or dimension. We can have geographical dialect. Within a speech community, you can have geographical dialect. For example, in London, there is a speech community which is called Cockney. Dialect is a specific form of a given language, of a particular language. Dialect is spoken in a certain locality or geographical area, which shows sufficient differences from the standard or literary form of that language as to pronunciation, grammatical construction, and idiomatic use of words. That is, these are some aspects in which a dialect differs from the standard language or other dialects. To be considered a distinct entity, yet not sufficient distinct from other dialects of the language to be regarded as a different language. So for being a different language, it has to have a lot of characteristics which can make it a distinct or unique entity different from that particular language. But indeed, a dialect does not have all these aspects, all these huge quantity of characteristics or differences which can make it a distinct language, a distinct entity. Sociolects. Sociolects are nothing but social dialects. There are other names for social dialects like group dialect and class dialect. Sociolects are spoken by the members of a particular group of a speech community. It is spoken by a stratum, a level of a speech community. For example, an occupational group within a society can have a sociolect. Some dialects are varieties associated with the speakers belonging to a given demographic group. For example, women versus men, or different social classes, etc. For example, among the older European American speakers in Charleston, South Carolina, the absence of ra in words such as bear or coat is associated with the aristocratic high status groups, whereas in New York City, the same pattern of ra-lessness is associated with working class low status groups. So you see, one aspect or the same aspect is associated with different class, sometimes with higher class in one geographical area and sometimes with a lower working class. This ra-lessness or use of ra is associated with the social group or social aspect or stratum of a speech community. Isogloss. Isogloss is not a type of or variety of language, rather it is an important aspect of variation of language. Isogloss refers to a line indicating the degree of linguistic change. For example, I have already told you that in different parts of Bangladesh, we use different or variation or different varieties of Bangla. Now, on a map of Bangladesh, you can draw some lines, some geometric lines, which can show that the area of Chittagong, area of Borishal, area of the northern part of Bangladesh use different linguistic elements differently. So the lines which can show on a map these characteristics of linguistic differences, those lines are called isogloss. So isogloss is a line on a map that marks the boundary between areas where language features are different. It is a representation of statistical probabilities. It is also a graphic way of portraying a translation of speech characteristics of one area to another. So, an isogloss indicates a dialect boundary. It is a term modeled on geographical terms like isotherm, which refers to a line joining areas of equal temperature, and also isobar, which is a line joining areas of equal atmospheric pressure. An isogloss is different from isograph. Isograph is a line on a linguistic map indicating a uniformity in the use of sounds, vocabulary, syntax, inflection, etc. So isograph is just the opposite of isogloss. Isograph shows uniformity in the use of sounds, vocabulary, syntax, or other linguistic elements, whereas isogloss refers to the distinction, the differences in the use of these elements. Here is an example of isogloss, and you see that this is a map, and here you have some lines, and you see the same vowel a is used in this area as a, but in this area the same vowel a is used as or. Here a is a diphthong which is used in this area as I and in this area as I. And how do you understand this? We understand these differences using a line drawn on the map, and these lines are called isogloss. Registers. Register is a variety of language according to use. Registers refer to stylistic functional varieties of a dialect or a language. Registers can be narrowly defined by reference to subject matter, that is, in which subject or field of discourse you are using that word or that language. For example, you can use a word as a jargon of fishing or in sports. So one word in sports can mean different from the meaning of the same word in another sector, like science. Registers can also be defined in reference to medium, like the mode of discourse, whether it is found in printed materials, written or spoken, or it is recorded on a tape, etc. And depending on the mode of discourse or medium, the words or the meaning or the language can have variation. Level of formality is another characteristics or aspect of registers. For example, style, your manner of discourse. If you are in a very formal situation, you use a word very formally, but the same word can be used or can have a different meaning if you use that word in a situation which is very informal. Registers are correlated with performers' social role on a given occasion. It is based on social roles and positions of the speaker. Within idiolect varieties shared by other persons and other idiolects appropriate to these roles. For example, when the professor's wife tells him to stop talking like a professor, it means that she is protesting at a misuse of register. So we know that stop talking like a professor has a different meaning in different situation, but here the wife is using the phrase with a different meaning. Varieties of language which correspond to different situations, different speakers and listeners or readers and writers and so on. So registers are the varieties of language which correspond to these situations. The role of a speaker is another aspect of register. For example, a young lecturer will speak in different ways when communicating with his wife, his children, his father, his colleagues, his students, when shopping, and so on. And each of these varieties will be registered. Idiolect. Idiolect is a variety which is used by one individual speaker. And idiolects include peculiarities of pronunciation, grammar, vocabulary, etc. And we know that as user of language, every individual speaker has his or her own style of speaking. So there is particularity, there is individuality in the use of linguistic elements. A group of speakers in a social or regional subdivision of a speech community can use a particular dialect or particular variation which can be called an idiolect. So an idiolect is an identifiable pattern of a speech characteristic of an individual or sometimes a group. Idiolect is the individual's personal variety of the community language system. Diglossia. Diglossia is a situation in which two languages or two varieties of the same language are used under different conditions within a community, often by the same speakers. We use language in different situations, and these situations in social linguistics are called domain. For example, family domain, academic domain, business domain. And in each domain, language can have its own, or language does have its own characteristics. There are situations in which two languages, say Bangla and English, or two varieties of the same language, say lower variety and higher variety or standard variety, can be used in different situations, but within the same speech community, and often by the same speakers. So that situation is called a diglossia. The term is usually applied to languages with distinct high or standard and low or colloquial varieties, such as Arabic. In Arabic, there is a high or standard variety and there are hundreds of low varieties. And both of them can be used in different situations by the same speaker. Two dialects or languages are found in regular use. So diglossia is a situation where both the varieties are used regularly. It is not that one variety is used only in a particular time, another variety is never used, just it exists in the society. That situation cannot be called a diglossia. One dialect or language is given higher status or prestige and is reserved for certain functions in a society, such as government, education, law, religion, literature, press, radio, and TV. And that is called a prestige variety. And that prestige dialect, often called the standard dialect or the language itself. Coexistence of language codes that are either two varieties of one language or two distinct languages can take place or can happen. For example, Canadian French and High French. Both of the varieties of these French are used by the same speakers, but in different domains or different situations. In Bangla also, when you come to campus and speak with your teachers and friends, you use high variety or standard variety of Bangla, but when you go home and you speak with your family members, say village people, you use a low colloquial variety of Bangla. So you can say this is a diagnostic situation. Polyglossia. In polyglossia, you have more than two varieties used in different situations, often by the same speakers. Two contrasting varieties, high and low, as well as diglossia, but in general, it refers to communities that regularly use more than two languages. In the Singaporean Chinese-speaking community, there are three languages that are used by the Singaporean Chinese, namely Mandarin, Cantonese, and Hokkien. They use Mandarin for their job. They use Cantonese and Hokkien for daily conversation among the family members. Mandarin is used also as a formal language, while Cantonese and Hokkien are used as informal language. So you see, in diglossia you have two varieties or two languages, but in polyglossia you have more than two varieties or languages involved. But in both situations, more than one languages or more than one varieties are being used regularly by the same speech community. Pidgins. A pidgin is a contact language, a mixture of elements from different natural languages. Say when two persons meet who do not share any common language, so how can they communicate? They can communicate if they are involved in communication for a long time, then there emerges a language which is in between the two languages. But that particular language, which is used for just contact or for communication, and of course with limited function, it does not have any first language user, but it is used only for communication. That is called a pidgin. A pidgin is the first level of the development of language to the standard variety of language. For example, the traders, the businessmen can use a pidgin. So businessmen from different countries who do not share any language, they can use their individual language, or they can mix up linguistic elements from both the languages and they can continue the communication. So I've already told you that pidgins have limited functions, and linguistic aspects are highly influenced by the more prestigious language or the more powerful language. So of the two languages of two persons, one must be more powerful in terms of economy, in terms of linguistic elements, in terms of social class or social position, prestige. So that language of that more prestigious person, more say powerful person will have more influence on the linguistic aspects of the pidgin. Pidgins do not have any first language user. That is, there is no one who uses pidgin as a mother tongue or first language. For example, Chinese pidgin just is used for limited purpose of trade. Creole is just the next level, upper level of pidgin, when a pidgin becomes lingua franca. That is, pidgin becomes a common language of some communities, and when pidgins become a mother tongue of some community. So, in contrast to pidgins, Creoles always have mother tongue or first language users. Pidgin extends beyond limited functions and enters other activities, not only limited communication or say trade, but rather a Creole enters different activities beyond trade or beyond that particular function pidgins used to have. Creoles have standardized grammar, vocabulary and sound system, but pidgins didn't have. And Creoles are spoken by increasing number of people as first language. So a Creole is a mixed natural language composed of elements of different languages in areas of intensive contact. Examples are Creoles of islands of Mauritius and Haiti. And many standard languages indeed were Creoles at some time of their evolution. Thank you very much for watching. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.